Hello, Sarah Sabin, Executive and Team Coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am very excited to have with me here today Ian Forrester, who is the founder and CEO of DAIVID. Ian, welcome to the show, and could you briefly introduce yourself to my listeners?
Certainly. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me on. So indeed, I am founder and CEO of DAIVID. And at DAIVID, we're using AI to predict the attention, emotions, and memories created by advertising.
Okay. And I'd love to know more about what inspired you to set up DAIVID. I think it was nearly 6 years ago now, right?
It was actually, yeah. I saw that on LinkedIn recently. Terrifying. 6 years have flown by. So I used to work at a company called Unruly, which is a video ad tech company, where I led the insight team for about 7 years. And we did a bunch of work around emotions and advertising and how emotions drive video effectiveness. Essentially, we created a product which could predict the shareability of videos. And essentially, at DAIVID, we're taking the work that we did at Unruly over all those years to the next level. So emotions is a big part of what we're focused on. Also, attention has become big within the advertising industry over the last 3 or 4 years. So attention is a big part of our focus as well. But essentially, we're bringing together lots of new technologies that have emerged in the last 3 or 4 years to be able to automate the testing of creative. So what we were doing at Unruly, and what a lot of businesses do when they want to test a piece of content, they show that content to individuals. And they ask a bunch of questions or run some biometrics and then get the data and put it into a report, which is a great way to test ads, but it's also fairly slow and fairly expensive. So the vision for DAIVID is to then automate that process so we can understand what's happening in a piece of content automatically. And given that set of stuff which is happening, predict how people are going to respond to it. Because when we do that, we can test ads much more quickly than using traditional means and much more cheaply, which opens up ad testing to this huge opportunity. Because only about 1% of ads are tested right now, but using our technology, we believe every single ad could be tested before it's launched.
And how accurate is the technology at predicting how successful something's going to be in advance?
So our minimum threshold for release of a product, of an algorithm, is 90% accuracy. And so every country that we operate in has its own algorithm, and every algorithm is powered by country-specific data. So we're continuously monitoring the accuracy of the predictions versus the human training data. So the foundation of what we do is human training data. So we are testing ads in the traditional way, i.e. showing them to people to gather the truth, the ground truth data. But then when we make our predictions, we can see the extent to which our algorithms are matching that data. And 90% is the cutoff where we say that's strong enough for the fully automated product to be launched in a particular country.
And how have things changed over the last 6 years in relation to, let's say, the effectiveness of ads and videos?
I mean, there's been this mass proliferation of metrics and ways to measure, which is confusing people. So if you think about creative effectiveness, which is the space that we're in, or advertising effectiveness more generally, up until the last couple of years, the focus has been on media effectiveness. And that has enabled people have been focused on the media part of the campaigns and tweaking certain elements of the media to gain additional performance. So you can tweak your targeting and what platforms you launch on. The kind of, you can make creative decisions, but tweak the creative in kind of minor ways, i.e., have someone wearing a blue t-shirt versus a red t-shirt versus a green t-shirt. That's the kind of the creative changes that have been made typically over the last 3 or 4 years. And that has brought the industry to a point where a lot of performance has been delivered by those incremental small changes around the media and creative. But media now has been optimized to like the millionth degree, and there's not a huge amount more performance that you can get from tweaking those little knobs around like how best to distribute a piece of content. And so the focus is now turning towards the creative itself and how to optimize that creative. But beyond creating beyond using the same creative, but then cutting up in like minor ways to improve that performance, there's much more performance that can be gained by understanding the strategy that you're using and fundamentally why content is working or not working, so you can then inform ideation. So before even any content is made, understanding the direction which your creative is moving in and the strategy which you're using, that's where we focus, is in a much more strategic approach where we're advising brands why their content is working or not, like really getting to the fundamentals of the why, to then enable them to improve their strategy going forward. So before any creative is made, the ideation is setting off in the right direction to create great content. That's where the huge strides can now be made.
Okay, so when you focus on the strategy at the beginning, then that allows you to inform the direction of the ideation.
Exactly. And up until now, it's been difficult to do that because the way that creative has been measured has been using what we call incomplete metrics. So there's lots of media metrics which are available, freely available to brands, things like media data, so view-through rates and click-through rates and number of reach and impressions. You've got social data, so a number of likes or shares or comments. You've got sales data. Did you actually sell anything with your creative, with your campaign? Did people click through on that particular ad and buy online, for instance? And I'm not suggesting for a second that any of these things is wrong or we should stop measuring them. In fact, they're all really important. They're all telling us what impact campaigns are having, but none of those things tell us why. So until we understand the why, it's really hard to generate insight to then set our strategy going forward. And so that's what we focus on at DAIVID. Not the what is happening, but what caused someone to do something, why someone, for instance, viewed a video to the end or decided to share it or click through and purchase. The why comes down to attention, emotions, and memory. Those are the drivers of the metrics which we can see, we have free access to. The reason this hasn't been such a focus in the industry up to this point is that measuring attention, emotions, and memory are much harder than simply running a digital campaign and collecting a bunch of reach and impressions data. So this is the core of what we're doing, like automating the understanding of the why to deliver that insight at scale, to then enable our clients to set their strategy at a much earlier phase of the campaign.
Well, you know what's interesting about what you've said? I'm thinking about that in a wider context, in business context, because the people within companies and companies themselves often leap to the problem solving part without understanding why. So what's the core of this problem existing in the first place, so you can get to the root cause rather than trying to treat the symptom of the problem.
Exactly. And if you haven't got the why data, then you're guessing. You can see what's happening. So you can see, for instance, that certain ads drove good sales and other ads didn't, which is a really important starting point. You need to have that information. But until you understand the why, you're kind of guessing. It becomes a subjective opinion as to why something worked or didn't. But this is why we're gathering that why data at scale, and a lot of it comes down to emotions. I mean, that's the core thing. Attention is very important, but emotions are absolutely critical, because we're all human and we're all responding to everything that we are exposed to emotionally. The thing is, with a lot of ads, you respond to it emotionally. We're all being bombarded with thousands of assets every single day. You go online, you're being bombarded with this content. And most of the time, you feel a positive response, but at a mild level. So you're like, oh yeah, that was okay. it's like a 4 or 5 out of 10.
Mhm.
The issue with that is 2 seconds later, you've forgotten that ad.
Mhm.
So the memory structure is not created. It all melds into one. It's all wallpaper. So you don't remember it. And then if you don't remember it, you're not going to act on it. It's not going to change your behavior.
Mhm.
And so this is what has been happening for years. People haven't really understood the why. And so they're kind of scratching around for the solutions and not getting to the core of the problem, why I think something didn't work. When you generate that emotional data at scale, you do understand the why. You understand either, it wasn't emotive enough in a positive way, or it might be confusing people or boring them, or more extreme negative emotions might come through, things like contempt and distrust and guilt and shame and all these terrible things, which we're testing creative around the world every single day. And every single day, advertising content is having this impact on people. It's evoking these negative emotions. 99.9% of the time, the advertiser is totally oblivious to the fact that their content is having this impact.
Mm.
It's not necessarily good news when they find out that it is, but then they can at least do something about it. And they know the reason why they're not getting the view through rate, or they're not getting the sales that they expect, or whatever it might be, then they can fix it because they've got to the root cause.
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, you might be telling someone what they don't want to hear, but it's what they need to hear in order to be able to do better. But I imagine, okay, so if we look at, DAIVID and, the business and its relationship with clients, when you're delivering this bad news clients, what you're doing is not really evoking the kind of response you want. Does this honesty create a relation of trust with your clients that, mean that they stay with you for the longer term?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Because what we say is based on data. It's not based on my opinion of, this ad is boring because of whatever. Like that's where the trust comes from. It comes from the fact that we've collected a lot of data, and the data is pointing in this direction. And we're the messenger at that point. We're like, sorry that this is the case, but it is the case, and you need to do something with it. And as soon as then clients start acting on that and making changes to their creative as a result of what we're recommending to them, and then they see the impact. So we work with a brand in Singapore who, like, really simple example, they created an ad, we tested it, we found that it was a central section of it was really confusing. It had lots of fast-paced cuts and you couldn't really follow the storyline. So we made a bunch of recommendations around how to tighten that up and make it less confusing, which their creative agency then implemented. And then they ran the ad again. So they'd already run it before Christmas, and then after Christmas, they ran the same ad, but with these new changes. And they were reporting like an 11 times uplift in sales from the post versus pre-Christmas based on our recommendations and our analysis. As soon as the brand sees that kind of impact, they're like, okay, these guys know what they're doing, and there's something in this. And that gives you the credibility, the proof's in the pudding, really.
So in terms of, some of the concepts that you've discussed, so knowing the why, being data driven, etc., does that feed into the way that you lead your team within DAIVID?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, so being data driven and the why, they feed into our values. So we're like a big part of what we're building at DAIVID is our culture. And we put a lot of effort into defining our values. So one of which is laser trail. So we're kind of operating on the edge of technology and doing stuff which has never been done before, which means that we're pioneers, which means that we often don't get things right, so we fail. But coming back to the why, like knowing why we failed and really dissecting that and being honest with ourselves means that we can then learn. So having this learning mindset is critical. Like it's so foundational to what we're doing, and being unafraid to fail, but then to learn why and then to improve going forward is like a core part of the business. So yeah, it's really deeply this growth and learning mindset is really deeply ingrained within what we're doing as one of our core values.
Mm. And how do you personally define strong leadership, and how do you see it impacting the growth of your company?
I mean, for me, leadership is around setting strategy,
Mm-hmm.
having a clearly defined vision for the business so everyone knows where we're going, and then putting in place the things that need to happen to get there, which means hiring the right people, assessing the culture, making sure that we have a culture which is aligned with the vision and which creates an amazing place to work where people, very talented people, will come and produce their best work. I mean, going back to Unruly, where I worked prior to DAIVID, the culture there was absolutely incredible. We were all pulling in the same direction. It was a meritocracy. It was just a great place to be. I stayed there 7 years, and that wasn't unusual for Unruly. But it is very unusual for the advertising industry. Like the average tenure is about 2 years. So and that was just testament to the fact that it was just such an amazing place to be, and people wanted to stay there. They wanted to. That meant that Unruly could attract the best talent, and that the best talent was then in the business, all pulling together in the same direction, and a super committed environment, which enabled us to create incredible things. And a big part, I think, of my job as a leader is to create that. I mean, we're definitely not copying Unruly's culture. There are certain parts which aren't right for us, and we've added new parts and different values, but the whole ethos around creating that culture and making it a real focus of the business, and for it to be absolutely core. So to hire and fire potentially on the basis of cultural values is critical. I think, because that then creates this environment where you create amazing things.
And I think, picking up on the last thing you said, hiring and firing on the basis of cultural values, once you set those values, and maybe those values evolve over time, but protecting those values is also key as you grow, because essentially, if you allow people to stay within your team that run counter to those values, it starts to muddy the waters of the whole corporate culture that you're trying to build. So it's one thing saying these are our set of values, but actually we kind of don't really follow them, and it's quite another actually living those values and making decisions from that place in the day-to-day.
100%. Yeah, so one of our advisors is a lady called Carolyn Taylor, who is CEO of a business called Walking the Talk. And she actually wrote a book called Walking the Talk. And she's a corporate culture guru. She goes into huge organizations, Big Pharma, for instance, where they've got a bunch of stuff written on the wall, their values, but it's not often adhered to. And in fairness to them, they recognize the fact that there's this gap between what they say and what they do, and then they'll hire Carolyn and her team to go in and fix that, basically. But we're working with Carolyn, looking at it from the other way around. Like, we didn't have an established culture, so in fact, in a way, we were lucky. So we didn't have a culture to change. We had a blank piece of paper and said, right, what should our culture be? What should our values be? And now we're putting in place, she calls it behaviors, systems, and symbols. So things which then make that culture come to life. So what are you rewarding? Like what behaviors are you rewarding? Like, if someone is someone could be an amazing salesperson, for instance, but might be not fostering an environment of psychological safety. Like, another one of our values is trust and embolden, where psychological safety is like an absolute key thing. But someone could be selling a lot. This hasn't happened, but just theoretically, someone could be selling a lot, and but then not engendering that psychological safety within their team, i.e., people don't feel safe to speak up. They get cut down if they challenge authority, or if they challenge the leader. at that point, we would need to let that person go, because yes, they might be bringing in the money financially, but that's totally counter to our culture. It's those kind of tough decisions that you have to make when push comes to shove. But then when you do that, when you do get rid of that person and say that this is just not acceptable in our culture, then it sends a really strong message, like the culture is king here, not the cash.
Yes.
And so that then becomes a very, very powerful reinforcement statement for everyone else in the business. Like they're not joking about this. They're walking the talk.
Yes. And I'm a firm believer in, I don't know if this is actually a quote someone said, but I say it a lot anyway. People see what you do, not what you say you're going to do and then not do.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So, I mean, walking the talk, right? You've got to, one thing is paying lip service and the other is actually doing something about it and remaining consistent and having the behavior systems and symbols in play, like the system as well, but like how are you rewarding people? Like what are your bonus systems? What are they based on? Are they based on adhering to the culture and really making the culture thrive, or is it just a purely sales focused culture? Or then there are certain ways that you can track it. It gets quite deep in terms of how you then implement it. But all that implementation is ensuring that you are doing what you say you're going to do and putting everything in place to make sure that happens.
Yes. And that's exactly right. We need systems to be held accountable to what we say we're going to do, because otherwise people get distracted, they go off track, and before you know it, there's a whole exercise trying to get you back on track again.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So, Ian, I'm curious how you've invested in yourself as a leader and what steps you take to grow and evolve in your role.
Yeah, I mean, so I've put a lot of time and energy into personal development, like starting from lockdown, actually. That's when I really started to focus on personal development and my own personal growth. I've done basically every Tony Robbins course he does, both virtually and in person. A lot of meditation retreats. I was at Joe Dispenza this year in Mexico. Loads of reading. That's a Tony Robbins thing. Leaders are readers, he says, right? And someone can put their life knowledge into a book. Really smart people who've been trying to figure out certain things, put their life knowledge into a book, which you can consume in 7 or 8 hours. And that's just an incredible resource, particularly when we're all walking around with these phones in our pockets, which basically we have access to all of the world's knowledge. All the great thinkers are in our pocket, and you can just listen to it on when you're walking the dog on an audiobook, which is what I do. Is tapping into that, making sure I'm reading every single day, and I'm growing every single day, and the small act of doing that, or even 5-10 minutes a day over the course of years, then compounds. It's like compound interest, but for the brain, where you're just continuously adding and adding and adding and learning and learning and learning, and then you start to understand connections between things that you've read about and that you learn, and then you kind of bring it all together with that kind of cross-pollination idea. So quite a lot. I mean, it's never a finished journey, right? Learning, there's always something to learn, and having the right mindset around that as well. Again, having the learning mindset, being humble enough to know that you don't know everything, you don't have all the answers. In fact, you've only got a very small percentage of the answers, and being willing to listen to different opinions and consume other sources of knowledge is really, really important.
And some of the things that you've said are really a common theme. So that constant learning every day. And it doesn't need to be reading for 5 hours a day. As you've said, it's the compound effect of, let's say, anywhere between 10 minutes to half an hour a day, whether it's podcasts, whether it's audiobooks, whether it's physically reading. It doesn't matter. You're building upon all the knowledge that you've had. And the other thing that comes up a lot is that leaders have this natural curiosity. So they have that drive and impetus to continue learning, whether that's within their industry, or whether that's in the capacity of personal development. My personal opinion is that the two feed very well into the other, and curiosity extends way beyond what your business is, or you know, what's going on in your industry. But you know, just to impress the point, it doesn't have to be this onerous exercise that some people can think it will be. It's just, you know, if you accept the fact that you're never done learning, and then just get on with learning a bit at a time, then
exactly,
you know, it's amazing how much you can pick up within the space of like 3 months, 6 months, a year.
100%. And a big part of it is making it easy for you. You know, I don't have a huge amount of time where I can sit down and actually read personally, because, you know, I've got a young baby and like super busy traveling a lot. So I mean, Tony Robbins calls it this concept of no extra time. I've got no extra time in my day, so how can I combine things that I'm already doing for maximum benefit? And that's where reading audiobooks really help. I'm already walking the dogs for like an hour a day, stick an audiobook in there, and then suddenly you've got a huge amount of learning while you're outside in nature walking the dogs. And so that's a really good use of time for me. And, yeah, and podcasts are the same. Like I've started listening to podcasts in the morning when I feed the dogs, and I take them out to the loo, and we do a few little bits of medication and stuff. It takes about 20 minutes a day. So, but again, that was dead time. I wasn't really doing anything at like 5:30 in the morning when I was doing that. But now I stick on a podcast, and it's easy. It's not onerous at all. It's just there, and you're consuming that knowledge from some of the world's great thinkers talking about really interesting subjects, in a super easy and manageable way.
And just to finish on that point, you can make anything easy, and it's the best way to start forming new habits. Another one of my favorite books is Atomic Habits by James Clear, but again, he talks about the concept of make doing the habit as easy for you as possible, because it stops the barriers to resistance.
Exactly right. Yeah, 100%. BJ Fogg talks about that as well in his book. What's his book called? I can't remember. Anyway, BJ Fogg, check him out. He talks about habits and behavior change, and one thing is a huge part of it is just making it easy. So if you want to, let's say you want to start going to the gym, or you want to start improving your physical appearance or your fitness, just start by doing like 2 push-ups. Set for the day, 2 push-ups. When you brush your teeth, after you brush your teeth. So again, habit stacking, like brush my teeth and then I'll do my 2 push-ups, and then do that for a few days, and then do 3, and just build it up. And makes it, and then it's not scary, because people think, oh, I've got to run a marathon, or I've got to like do something which is out of the ordinary and which is extreme. But no, you just go for a walk, go for a 5-minute walk outside, and then build it up, like do it consistently every day, and you'll soon find, actually, I want to do 10, I want to do 15 or 20. But starting's the hardest thing. Then you get momentum, then you carry on. I'm like, okay, I've done it for 10 days in a row, and I'm not going to lose my streak now, so, and then you get, the more you do it, the more it becomes you, the more you are that person. And then suddenly going for a walk it's just not something you ever consider, because it's just become part of you.
Exactly. It becomes, just something you do, and then it feels weird not doing it.
Exactly.
So, final question, Ian. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Good question. I mean, I think my 20-year-old self I'm just thinking what I would have listened to. There's one thing giving advice, and there's another, like, that person actually wanting that advice and listening to it. I'd have said, in terms of culture, find somewhere to work where you feel fulfilled and valued, and where there's a supportive environment. I worked at a few corporations when I was straight out of uni where that definitely wasn't the case. And I didn't thrive until I found Unruly, where the culture was incredible, and that then brought out all this growth and improvement and self-discovery. Because before that, I was just like in a little box and, like, no psychological safety. And so in that situation, you're scared. And so when you're fearful, you don't grow. You're just trying to survive. Like, you're not learning. You're not, your mind isn't open. You're just like, okay, how do I get through the next day? And that just stunts everything. But when you do find that environment where suddenly you're brought out of yourself, because it's welcoming, and it encourages you to come with your ideas and to try and experiment, that's just an absolute game changer for your mental health, for your development, for your growth. And so I'd encourage my younger self and young people today to just find an environment that does that for them. That's not to say that as one size fits all, there's a perfect environment that would be the case for everyone. Like, some people thrive in different environments, but I spent too long not in an environment not conducive to bringing the best out in me, because I thought that's where I had to be. But that's simply not the case. If you're feeling that every day and you're not happy, you're not growing, you feel fearful, then do something else. Life's too short.
Yeah. And I just want to sort of finish off that point by saying, when you're in the right environment, it feels good, right? And it feels the opposite of fear and being there because you feel you should, or because someone told you, or whatever. And that's how you start to understand whether you're on the right track.
100%. It does feel exactly. It feels natural. It feels good. It's not forced, and that's when you know you're in the right place.
Thank you so much for this conversation today, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sarah. Me too. Cheers.
And to my listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to take part in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series, please do reach out to me. Bye for now.